Well, you know that we are to discuss today the concept or theory of sovereignty. It is a very important and basic concept in political science and law. Now, the concept of sovereignty, this term in English, it has come from a Latin word, superneas, meaning thereby that is anything which is supreme is called sovereign. So in that connection, sovereignty of the state is discussed in political science as the supreme power of the state. So first it is necessary to know what is the nature of the supremacy. And certainly the state is not a constant concept. It varies from time to time and it varies at different historical phases. But overall, any constituted political authority is generally called the state. State in relation to the citizens and state in relation to the other states or international field. So naturally, sovereignty, when we talk of internal sovereignty, it means that the relation between the sovereign and the subject or the citizens, that is within the country and within the state. And when we talk of international aspect of sovereignty, it means that supreme power of the state vis-a-vis the similar power with other states. So in that sense, this term is generally understood in political theory. Let us just have some preliminary ideas about how sovereignty has been viewed by the experts in politics, political science, jurisprudence, and legal system. First of all, I have just pointed out that it can be internal or external. Now that meaning is quite clear. Internal means so far as the sovereign's authority over the citizens, sovereign's right to claim allegiance or obedience of the citizens or his subjects. If it is a monarchical system, the subjects. So internally, all states what this name is sovereign. If the sovereignty is challenged, then it is a challenge to be tackled by the state. But if in this game the ruler cannot keep his own sovereign power, then naturally sovereign authority is changed, his character is affected. Secondly, it is sometimes viewed, but the experts have viewed it as, and that is a very significant distinction between legal sovereignty and political sovereignty. As the name suggests, as the word has been used, legal sovereignty means sovereignty in the eye of law, or sovereignty vis-a-vis the interpretation of laws, whether the laws are really framed by the sovereign, is really supreme, has got its full power of allegiance from the people. And naturally, the legal expert, jurist, they are more concerned with legal sovereignty. But there sometimes a situation arrives where there is legal sovereignty technically, but the ruler or the sovereign power is not that sovereign. That means a situation may arise. I say all these things in order to make the distinction between legal and political. When that challenge comes, so naturally we have to given to understand that the political situation has arisen, which has made this difference. So, for example, in the context of a revolution. So when a revolution, in the midst of the revolution, nobody knows where sovereign power is, but in a very strict legal sense, till a decision is arrived at through the revolutionary process, the ruler is the ruler. in different phases of history, we know that the ruling concept of ruler, concept of rule, concept of sovereign authority, they have changed. For example, in ancient times, naturally, as we find in history, everywhere there was the monarch or the king. If we go to the roots of it, how it emerged, have you got any idea?
Yes, to some extent.
Well,
that monarchy was not a first phenomena. Probably the people had power amongst themselves, they shared the power, but gradually the institution of monarchy came. Someone who used to lead them in battles, in raids, in cattle raids, the leader among them was chosen the monarch. And with the consolidation of private property, monarchy was established as a formal institution.
That's right, but even a stage before that, human beings used to live in tribes.
So can we call it a contract between the people and the...
No, that's a different, very subsequent stage. I'm talking about how it emerged.
Okay.
When there is the stage of tribal life, so no tribe can be organized without a leader.
Yes.
So that is emergent, that is very inherent in it, that there must be some sort of a concept of supremacy, who leads. And without this, there will be chaos. So organized political life demands the concept of sovereignty. Now if we come to other things that they have, at least theoreticians, they do it, the classification. So de facto, they say, de facto sovereignty or de jure sovereignty. De jure is what I have just said, legal sovereignty. Sovereignty as per law. And de facto is as it exists in reality. So now what you wanted to say, that there is a large number of people who are sovereign. Yes, in a moment of transition, in a chaotic situation, in revolutionary moments, it happens until a supreme leader has emerged. But those political parties which are very organized, generally they have got a tendency to have some sort of a, whether they recognize or not, some sort of a supreme leader. Isn't it? That is our experience everywhere. So that depends on the politics of the time. But conceptually, we are talking of concept, we are talking conceptually, there is a de jure concept and there is a de facto concept. You know, just before the proclamation of Queen Victoria, 1858 in our country. Now just before that, who was the sovereign? Nobody knows. When the mutiny was going on, who was the sovereign? There was a de jure sovereign was Bahadur Shah, the last Mughal emperor. He was the real legal sovereign of the country. But no power, absolutely no power. I hope now conceptually it is quite clear what a de jure and de facto. It is considered that all these origins of these concepts like state, sovereignty, etc., they have come from the Western world. But that is not the fact. I think by this time I have been able to explain that in any organized society, polity or political life means an organized political life, organized community life for a political purpose. And if you say what is political, that means politics is that art which is always trying to find what is acceptable. And if there is nothing acceptable, then the pursuit of what is acceptable is the very nature and essence of politics. So that means at the moment of chaos, political chaos, there is no sovereign, clear sovereign. Maybe de jure, maybe somebody else, but not actually, no politically. But when it is settled, stability is restored, then first thing is, who is the sovereign, who is the head? Just like a family life. Conceptually, there is a very necessity of who is the leader of the family or the head of the family. So, in the evolution I say that in the history of mankind, in the history of thinking of politics or political science or jurisprudence, naturally it has evolved. It didn't come from all of a sudden. So, we find a reference to this in Western thinking. But don't think that there was no such thinking in the Orient. In China, in India, in Japan, everywhere, naturally organized life means there is the concept of who is the leader of the community. So approaches differ. So everywhere in the Orient, generally the concept of a divine supreme authority, that is, the ruler is there, ruler is supreme internally vis-a-vis the subjects, but the ruler swears that I rule in the name of God. More or less, at a certain stage, there was the concept that God is supreme, and this real world we live in, it has to be a leader, but that leader is a representative of God on earth.
To bestow some sort of legitimate character on his rule.
Yes, in order to lend a legitimacy on what right you are ruling. Because they claim, that is called the divine origin theory. That is, I am the representative chosen by God. The first origin of this concept was not in the name of sovereignty as such. Because the ancient period, we find that Greek civilization which came first, there Aristotle was the person who systematized the studies of politics, political science, constitutions, people, revolution. Before that, his master Plato, he was basically a philosopher, and he had a concept of a ruler who is supreme but subject to certain conditions, that he must be a very judicious person. He must balance the interest of such and such and such and things. Ideal, he talk of ideal ruler. But in Aristotle we find there is some sort of an attempt to define the state. But he didn't use the word state, they used the word polis in Greek, P-O-L-I-S. Polis is not equivalent to state. Polis, Greek word in its full sense, is society and state mingled with. That together is the joint concept. When we say Greek polis, city-state, technically translation is city-state, but it is because of the geographical limitations that within the city they had organized political life. But conceptually, it was both society and state combined in the concept of polis. So when Aristotle in his Politics says that man loses his human character without living in a polis, that means every person must have an understanding about his place in the polis and naturally his duties vis-a-vis the ruler. Not that ruler is all comprehensive supreme power, because there was policy, society included in the polis. But a more refinement come conceptually during the Roman period. In Roman civilization, I am not quite sure whether you are aware of it, the most important contribution of entire Roman civilization is the concept of law. It was not there in that sense, not there in the Greek civilization. It was Cicero, the only philosopher cum jurist, who talked of law, legal system, etc. And subsequently there emerged a group in the Roman civilization who are called the lawyers or the jurists, practically those who are talking of theories of law. So they refined this further. And there it was, clearly now these concepts came, legal and political. Legal sovereignty, political sovereignty. So in that sense, we get a advance in Roman time. During the Middle Age, when you come to the Middle Age, between 11th century and 13th century, there was among the church fathers, there was intense discussion on it. And they finally came to the conclusion, and the best figure of that time was St. Thomas Aquinas of 13th century. He formulated a theory of sovereignty. In this sense, he said that sovereignty, now your point that it is one or many or collective, very clearly St. Thomas Aquinas said there are two authorities. He used the word end, that is purpose. What is internal end and what is the general end. Internal means that within the community who wields the power. But similarly, since they were church fathers, they say simultaneously there is another, the other world. They say use the word eternal. That is those who are concerned with eternity. They are also authority. And in course of time, 14th, 15th century, it was elaborated and given more interpretation this way and that way by many people. But more or less, the theory of two worlds, theory of two powers, that concept emerged in connection with sovereignty's concept. So when the medieval period, for variety of reasons, a student of history, you know, for a variety of reasons, medieval period came to an end. And at the end, when it was coming to a close, we find a remarkable man in political history, political thought, Niccolo Machiavelli. But he emerged in a particular political context in Italy of his time, early 16th century. That is, small states scattered over northern Italy, and each state claims that I am the sovereign, and nobody believes the other. So an atmosphere, environment of conspiracy, disbelief, etc. And Machiavelli was a statesman. He was the advisor to the prince. Prince means the ruler in that sense, simply. So what the ruler should do. So that is the point we have to take up in a discussion of, from theoretical angle, that Machiavelli was the champion of the concept of executive sovereign. He is not concerned with any other. How the prince can be protected, how the prince can prosper, how the prince can have more power. These were his concern, and so he said like this, that he must be fox and the lion at the same time. His celebrated statement that by cunning, for deliberations, anyway, he has to gain power and retain power by hook or crook. But that is why Machiavellism has become a phrase in English language or in everywhere. But I think that is an injustice to Machiavelli, because he wrote another book for his very famous for this, Discourses, where we find a completely different Machiavelli, where he is talking of law, he is talking of what is just, what is talking of individuality, everything. But typical Machiavelli is one who gave the theory of executive sovereign. He didn't bother, because that was not the time and that was not the political condition of legislature or people, etc. So he was concerned with that. But a few years, within 50 years of Machiavelli's time, we come across in the 16th century another great figure in France, Jean Baudin. He gave a doctrine or theory of sovereignty which is contrary to Machiavelli, legislative sovereignty, because that was the compulsion of the time. Every thinker, every philosopher, thought process emerged from the context of his time. That was the time when the French ruler was to negotiate a situation in which the old medieval traditions are going on divided loyalty, church asserting itself, church having huge property. Church was quite powerful in determining the lifestyle of the people, including marriage and succession of property, everything. So people used to look at the church, what we should do. But after all, there was a monarch, there is a king. So Baudin gave his interpretation in terms of sovereignty, that sovereignty belongs to the, real sovereignty belongs to the legislature, the assembly. Baudin was farsighted enough to determine and to emphasize or to notice that the advisors to the king are quite important. So if we again go back to the distinction between legal and political, so in a political sense, Bodleian concept of sovereignty is political. And that is why he is quite famous, because he was a trained jurist, so in a very clearly he could define what he wanted to say. Buddha accepted one limitation, that when he was talking of sovereignty belongs to the king, subject to this so-called assembly. So obviously he was not, by term supremacy or sovereignty, he did not mean autocracy. Far from it. He meant some sort of a balance. But it should be a clearly understood balance. There is no hodgepodge in Buddha's thinking. He was very clear what he wanted to say. For example, he said that a ruler's ruling or supremacy or sovereign power is limited. Secular ruler has no jurisdiction. So that is a limitation. Technically, he said the sovereign power is the sovereign throughout the kingdom. But in matters pertaining to religious life, only that part, the people will be guided by the church, religious organization. Then he said that in matter of taxation, sovereign is not sovereign. In this sense, he has to think always in terms of what is tolerable degree of taxation. Since I am sovereign, I have got the right to increase taxes and I go on increasing taxes. He said, no, that is not the concept of a ruler. Ruler has got the basic obligation to look after the welfare of the society. Ruler does not mean autocrat. So that is a very interesting thing. And second and thirdly, Buddha says that there are other interests in society. That is very remarkable, and which was later taken up by that hint. He gave a hint, but that was developed later on by another great French sociologist and philosopher, Montesquieu. That what is society? Society is a coexistence of different interest groups. Till now we are in that tradition, because that is the nature of society. This shows that, I am coming to generality, that shows that there is always a social pressure, either visible or invisible. And the sensitive ruler must take note of it. And so when in sophisticated modern times we find that, for example, in America, Britain, the developed societies or democracies, most famous example in my mind is Swedish political system. No decision is taken without consulting the concerned interest. But at the same time, there is one Swedish king, there is a parliament, there is a cabinet, everything is there. Modern Sweden. But everybody knows the limit to up to what he goes, all authorities. After all, if it is a point of agricultural taxation, for example, then Swedish Agricultural Association has to be consulted. Without this, it won't be done. So this in a vague way, Buddha suggested it, that there are other interests in society who are also powerful in that sense. So that was the situation. And there is a famous commentator, Harnshaw, who was a very famous as an author. He said that in Buddha we find the emphasis on what the sovereign should do. He should consult this, he should be this, respect to church, etc. What the ruler should do, that was the main focus of Buddha. In that way, nature of sovereignty in the mind of Buddha we can understand. But there are other commentators like McQuillan and Shepard who said that in Buddha, legal sovereignty's limitations that he indicated, that is most important. That I have just talked about, that there is limitations. So to understand the nature of the limitations to the sovereign power, that is the best way to understand Buddha. So in this way, this is the complexities or niceties of conceptual analysis, the which angle we see a particular problem. Well, after Bodhin or Buddha, we come to a great figure who also contributed in a very major way to the conceptualization sovereignty, and he was Thomas Hobbes of England. Now Thomas Hobbes, because of the situation in the mid-17th century England, there was civil war going on. Looking at the civil war, he was not a party to it. Looking at the civil war, he derived certain conclusions about the nature of the state and sovereignty. That is very important to note. That is, Hobbes took a strict legalist view. So legalist view of sovereignty is best represented in that late medieval period by Hobbes. He analyzes it like this, that sovereign power is not circumscribed. Because of the, again I refer to the revolutionary situation, chaotic situation of civil war, he took the stand: if stability is to be restored, and stability is the main objective of political life, then sovereign, Hobbes made sovereign completely free. He is not circumscribed or limited. And his concept of sovereignty, it is said that Hobbesian sovereignty is unlimited and unlimitable. It cannot be limited. Complete, supreme, theoretical power he gives to state or the ruler. He used the term Leviathan, a mythological figure, the animal, anyway, most powerful, unlimited, no question of limiting sovereign power. So what his motive was to create, why did he did it? He, as a philosopher, his motive in reference to the context he lived in and wrote was to restore political order and stability. So he gave this theoretical formulation that sovereign power cannot be bargained, sovereign power is never separable, it cannot be limited or unlimited. So we find that sovereign power in Hobbes, he has got all the rights to govern and no duties except establishing law and order. That is their only duty to their people. So that is Hobbes' contribution, and we have to go to the next stage in the next program.
Thank you, sir.